morning, everybody, all of you here in this very crowded room. Warm welcome to this session on leading sustainability from the boardroom. It's a session that is co-hosted by BLab Switzerland. They're here in the room, and you'll hear from them later, as well as by InTent, and you'll also hear from them at a later stage. 2 weeks ago, when the UN Secretary General opened the General Assembly, he has a very alarming opening, and he said, and I quote, "The Sustainable Development Goals are issuing an SOS. Even the most fundamental goals on poverty, hunger, education are going into reverse." Around the same time, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, as you know, they're issuing every year their Goalkeepers report, collecting data and tracking progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals. And they also concluded that 7 years in, and again I quote, so we're halfway to 2030, the world is on track to achieve almost none of the goals. So clearly, we all here at that conference, and also in this panel, because we all need to redouble our efforts if we want in 2030 to not be full of shame and actually be able to have something to say, including to our children. So I think it's important we have this conversation. And business has its part to play in redoubling these efforts. And the role of the board is also important, and this is what we're going to discuss here this morning. For this, we have fantastic panelists that are working on these issues days in and days out, from as seasoned board members, as academics, as executive working with boards. So I'd like to welcome them on stage. I don't know if we're going to see their names yet up there, but please, to my panelists, a warm welcome and join us on stage, coming through here. And we can applaud them when they come. Welcome Isabelle Cohen-Solal, Julia Binder, Michael Heeb, and Raphaël Archambault-Sicot. Thank you for joining us this morning. Before we hear from them, and I'll start the conversation with them, and then you'll have an opportunity to ask questions. There will be mics circulating in the room. I'd like to welcome André Hoffmann to open this session. André Hoffmann is the vice chairman of Roche and the co-founder of InTent, which is one of the co-organizers of this event. So InTent's mission is to accelerate the adoption of sustainable solutions that work for business, people, and the planet by building bridges, that's why we're here, and connecting people. André, please come on stage, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Catel, for this very nice introduction. It's nice to see that some people have actually succeeded in coming before the first coffee. Thank you very much for being here. We are talking about important issues, and I'm absolutely delighted to be able to introduce the session as is. As you probably know, I am sitting on the board of our family company, of a company called Hoffmann La Roche, which is a pharmaceutical company. I've been a board member for 26 years. And I'd quite like to sort of introduce this session by starting with the genesis of why I got so involved into these issues. I think that when I arrived at the board of our company, and apologies for people who were there yesterday, you already heard this, when I arrived on the board of our company, one of my first ambitions was to try to change the way we interacted with nature, the way we, at the time, nature was just species and species. It was not really sort of societal issue it has become now. And so we started this dialogue saying, we need to do something for our footprint. We need to diminish our impact on the planet. And people in the boardroom, all, of course, significantly older than me, with perhaps even bigger stomachs and scratching their heads, looked at me and said, well, that's not what business is about. Business is about making money. And then we can give you some for you birds in the Camargue, for you tigers in India, and we can deal with this in that way. And I think that for me it was a bit of a shock to understand that for the majority of people who are efficient and big in business at doing their job, the consideration that nature was part of the equation was something that just didn't come in. Nature was not in the boardroom. Nature was abroad, nature was in Africa, nature was maybe in the Camargue, but it certainly wasn't something that was going to stop a Swiss company to execute on its mission. Now, today I'm glad to say that this has changed. This has changed quite dramatically because we have really understood that it's going to be very difficult to have a long-term future for our business model if we don't integrate this notion of sustainability. So sustainability is not protecting species and places. Sustainability is taking care of the system, which is our life support system on Earth. Humans are part of the system. If the system doesn't work anymore, humans will not survive for very long. And if you bring the drill a little bit deeper, you can realize that this is not something to do with nature per se. This is not about ecosystems only. It's also about us. It's also about our activity as humans. So I would contend that the value creation mechanism which is at the root of business is based on the optimal use of three capitals: the human capital, each of us individually. How can we go into a company and in that company find something that makes us happy? I would like to see happiness as an index, as a measure for performance of companies, but that perhaps a little bit too early. But each individual has to be able to develop into its own career path. Secondly, we need to look at social capital. Why are we stronger together than individually? How can we together create something that is for the good of all and not just for the individual good? Yes, I forgot to say that, of course, the maximization of human capital is not based on materiality. It's not how much money you make that matters, it's how happy you get. But anyway, we can discuss that later maybe. And then the third point would be the natural capital. So if we really understand that every decision is based on an optimal use of these three capitals, and in particular understanding the interdependencies of these three capitals, we can construct this long-term value, which is what we need. I think that the end of the human journey has to be reaching a sustainable prosperity. We need prosperity for social and human reason, and we need sustainability so that we can be able to do that in the long term. If we don't reach the sustainable prosperity, I don't think I have to say, have to go back to that. But anyway, today we're talking about businesses and we're talking about boardrooms. I don't know if you remember the picture when we entered. There's this wonderful picture where you see a table of the boardroom and empty chairs. That's exactly what you shouldn't do. You should occupy these chairs, and you should make sure that these chairs are actually involved into the governance of the institution. Today, you can no longer run companies only based on the principle of short-term profit maximization. You need to go into the long-term thinking. Sustainability is, of course, also financial. There is no such thing as a company that cannot make money, but you should not concentrate just on that point. Yeah. So to translate these rather lofty aims into reality, we've had to create a couple of interesting instruments. And today we are in particular here with the help of BLab Switzerland, BLab Swiss, who jointly with us InTent have launched in Davos last May. It wasn't in January this year, in May. The initiative for the Swiss Board for Agenda 2030, where the SPA, triple bottom line, which will be one of the subjects that will be discussed in the panel today. So I don't think I will prolong my time in the limelight. What I really wanted to say is that the work done here is absolutely crucial for the future of businesses in Switzerland. The future is sustainable, or there is no future. And I think it's important that we should remember that. Our duty when we look after shareholder money, or if we look about stakeholders' future, is based on making sure that we manage the capitals we've received in the most efficient manner. It's no longer a case for ideology, it's no longer a case for short-term benefits, it's really a case for the long-term survival of our species on this planet. Voilà, I just wanted to say that. Thank you very much to everybody, and I wish you a very good session with this wonderful panel. Catel, if you're in agreement, I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, André. Thank you very much, yes. So that's it. In that board, we are trying to make the connection between board and boardroom, so something quite nuts and bolts, and sustainable prosperity, right? So that's the idea. My name is Catel Le Goulven. I come from INSEAD, where I head the Hoffman Global Institute for Business and Society, and there we try and we push for the integration of sustainability into management education, thinking that we need to change management education to change business. Now, here I'm only a moderator, and I'd like to start that conversation welcoming someone from another school, IND Business School, also very engaged on that topic. And this is Julia Binder, who is Professor of Sustainable Innovations and Business Transformation. You have the same drive in your school, and as you are used to teaching and explaining to people who are not very aware of this topic what we're talking about, I'd like you to start helping us so that we land a little bit from all these lofty words, as André mentioned, and the jargon that he used. SDG, ESG, sustainability. Can you help us unpack that? Are these all the same words and the same objectives, or are there different? In the finance world, they use ESG more, etc. So can you help us here to set the stage? Thank you very much, Julia.
Thank you so much, Catel. And I think it's actually a very important question, because what I'm increasingly observing that we use these terms interchangeably, and I think this is a danger, and I'll explain why. So maybe if we start to define these terms, then SDGs, part of the UN Agenda 2030, we've all come across the 17 SDGs. And I think the first fallacy from time to time I see is that it's used as a communication framework.
Yeah.
The beauty and the danger of the SDGs is you can put almost everything under the 17 SDGs. So you really need to actually go a level deeper to the 169 targets if you want to have any kind of meaningful interpretation of what the SDGs really mean on a business level, on a company level. So SDGs, this big framework, bringing together multiple nations, almost all nations on the planet, a historic agreement in 2015. So I think we should not underestimate the importance of this framework for giving us this shared agenda to bring nations together to achieve the same outlook on sustainability. Absolutely crucial. Now, sustainability has been around for quite a while, and companies have historically struggled a bit to understand what is the business case when we talk about sustainability. Sustainability has often been seen as a responsibility of the firm, and then ESG came into the game. And ESG really is the language that the investor community is using to describe environmental, social, and governance factors and how they affect the business. And here's the very, very important differentiation that I always try to explain. When we talk about ESG, it really is about how environmental, social, and governance factors affect the financial value and the company performance. It's a risk management and investment framework. It's by definition not, I want to have a positive impact, as André was explaining before, on the planet or society. This is not at the heart of the ESG. And I think this is important because then confusion happens, like with a very furious Elon Musk, who is removed with Tesla from the S&P 500 list, and he gets furious, and he tweets one of his famous tweets, where he basically then says, ESG is a scam, it has been weaponized by phony social left-wing activists, right? So he gets really angry about all of this. And at the core is that he doesn't understand. And then he says that Exxon makes the ESG list and Tesla doesn't. And I think for the majority of civil society, we're looking at this and it's like, that's strange, right? There is a sustainability pioneer leading the path towards a new mobility future, right? We can debate whether electricity is really the way to go, but so basically you see that on the one hand, and you see an oil and gas company on the other hand, and the oil and gas company makes it to the ESG top 500 list, right? And you're looking at this like, this seems strange, but if you understand the nuance, then Exxon is just much better in managing the ESG risks for their financial performance. And Tesla is not. If we look at a very crazy, sorry to say, an unpredictable CEO, then governance factors are not well managed. If we look at labor practice, then social factors are not well managed. So it really is the difference. How do these factors affect me, and how do I affect the world? And I think we really need to move more towards this notion of how do I as a company can positively affect environment or society.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Juliette. I think it's extremely important, and that's why we wanted to start from that, because this is a very, very strong differentiating point, including between different continents approaching this idea, let's say between Europe and the US, right? So to what extent does a company only consider the risk to their business, and or to what extent the company also consider their contribution to social and environmental progress. So thank you very much for clarifying this for us. I'd like now to turn to you, Isabelle, for another clarifying point. So in this ESG, we have governance, and that's what we're going to be talking about here today. Same thing, this is very lofty. Can you help us lay people understand what's behind governance? And the reason I'm asking you is that you are a committee member of the Swiss Circle of Female Board Members. You are a seasoned board member yourself in different industries. So you've been in that place a long time, and people are still asking you the question. So what is governance?
Indeed, yeah. Thank you so much for the question. It's a big problem, actually. Many people just don't grab what is behind governance, and that's a big problem still now. It's still a problem. So I wish that we could help, and that today some people just take some elements. The broad definition about governance is the process, how the company is run and overseen. So it's very much on all level, operational or decisional, or so it needs to be done by in good faith, properly done. So it's very large, very broad, but it's more to say that we need to have governance at each level, and it should be also followed, carried on, monitored, and make sure that there is still governance on each step. It's not only that you put in place some process, but you even revise them. So it's an ongoing process. It's a mentality, it's a mindset, it's a way of thinking.
And we hear same thing, terms like fiduciary responsibility, duty of care. Can you also help us understand these terms, please?
I would say on that point that it's more a time horizon matter. Is that if you take very short term, you just think, as André Hoffmann said, it's about money. But indeed, it can destroy value so much. Yeah. So if you think longer term and sustainably, meaning that you will be there in a month's time, or 3 months' time, or beyond a year, etc., you need really to think longer term. And fiduciary duty is that is to the board member really the aim at the end. It includes sustainability. Yeah. You see that's where the coherence comes.
Thank you very much, Isabelle. So clearly the board and the governance is here to keep that objective on the long term, to go beyond the more regular and more short-term profit makings, hence its role in taking care of sustainability. And that makes me turn to you, Michael. You are the chairman of the International Board Foundation and the vice chair of the Foundation for Value Creation. So that's a big responsibility. You are an expert in governance that you also teach as well. We have a lot of teachers here in this panel, and also on sustainability. So my question to you is, how are you seeing these two things coming together? How increasingly are boards and their responsibility moving to integrate sustainability?
Yeah, I think we have to look at two levels. On the one hand, and you mentioned before, there has been a lot of attention, in particular from the investor community, on those topics. So ESG, the term already kind of brings those two concepts together. Yeah. And therefore, there has been a lot of attention from investors, from politicians, from other stakeholders, which definitely had also an impact on how boards think about it and talk about it, because they need to respond to these needs from these stakeholders. At the same time, we also see quite some movements in the regulatory sphere. So if you look at the European Union, also the Swiss government, there are kind of new regulations coming into place beginning of next year and the following years, which will actually force boards to take this topic seriously, to report, to reflect on it. And then I think, interestingly, the point you mentioned about fiduciary duties, there are even some countries like France where they amended the law and saying, as a board member, you're not just responsible for the well-being of the company, but as well to take into consideration environmental and social issues. And we see similar discussions at the EU level at the same time. Now, all this said, that's the external forces on the companies. If you look inside the boardroom, however, what I observe are, I think, a couple of gaps still around. I think, first of all, there's a gap between awareness and action. People, talk about these topics, they hear about it, but then when it comes to real action, there's still, I think, a long way to go. Secondly, what I also see, it's sometimes a gap between what we would call curiosity and competence. So people are eager to understand and to talk and to debate. But I think there's sometimes a little bit the lack of the technical competence, or really understanding what you nicely described before. What's it all about? What's the difference? What's scope 1, 2, 3? And all these technicalities, which you don't need to understand in full detail, but still you need to know the basic concepts. And then the third gap I very often see is between boards still taking very much a compliance risk perspective instead of a value creation perspective. And I think I very much look forward to the debate today that we probably can see how can we help boards, or how can boards kind of bridge these gaps.
But if I understand, I mean, you're saying the examples you're giving here are very European in terms of external pressure. You talk about investor in Europe, what the Green Deal is doing, and regulators. Is that pressure for boards to do more from external point very European? Is that the same in other parts of the world?
I think we have to be very careful that, if you talk about these concepts of ESG and so on, these are very Western-centric concepts that we talk about. When you go to Asia and to other places, there's a very different understanding of sustainability, and it's dealt with very differently. And I think that's probably I think it's one of the challenges for internationally operating companies to be open and to try to understand how others might define sustainability. And I think that's not an easy one, because you have to really adopt it, translate it to all the jurisdictions or regions you're operating in.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much. So let me also welcome Raphaël. Thank you very much for joining us. You are the Sustainability Director of L'Occitane. So you don't sit on the board. You are part of the executive committee of the company, however. And you've been in that role for 5 years. And can you explain to us how your relationship with the boards of L'Occitane has helped you carry your mandate of pushing for sustainability inside the company?
Yes, so it's true. I have been in this position for 5 years, and good news is that I always had a slot to present sustainability during board meetings. So actually this is already a good news, and I think this is the first step to always have sustainability integrated into the board meeting presentation. Yet, and it has been done because of the chairman's sponsorship.
Yeah, I was wondering, so who took that decision? Where does that come from? Is that coming from the CEO, from the chairman of the board?
Chairman and CEO, actually. But because I think in this company it has always been in the, in the brand DNA, etc. So I think it was easier than maybe for other companies. Clearly, what I saw maybe for the 2-3 past years, I clearly see more and more questions, specific questions. So you were talking about curiosity. I can clearly see a lot of curiosity coming on. I think 2 reasons about this evolution. Maybe the first one, maybe a little bit of trust with me, because they know me.
Good work.
No, but not because of me, but because I've been here for a couple of years. So they know me. I have some meetings with them separately, so they can ask their question with no shame. And maybe the second reason is really thanks to investors, because they ask more and more questions on ESG. And also I could see that on my side, because I always have meetings with investors after the ESG report publication. And maybe 5 years ago they had a lot of questions, but now it's more specific questions, more high-level conversations, so with ESG analysts. So I think they had this also external pressure from investors, so now they are really more into specific question during the board meetings.
And concretely, when you say that, so the level of sophistication of the ask from investors has increased, and that generate more interest from the board. Is there pressure there? Are investors saying, unless you do this and this and that, we are not funding anymore? I mean, is that coming that way, or is it more right now at the level of a dialogue? Let's put it like that.
It's more dialogue. It's not. Yeah, it's more dialogue. There are more digging into specific topics, so asking more questions, scope 1, 2, 3, for example. So now they have to learn what is scope 1, 2, 3 more in detail.
So they go basically into really more the very operational details of the company to see what, and so board members need to be equipped to have a finer knowledge of the company and what they do to be able to answer. Right.
And also investors, usually they compare also ESG report from different brands. So they are asking, for example, you have this target of this ambition, but I see the other company who has a higher ambition. Why do you explain that? So the board member have to explain also why there is a difference.
Okay. Okay, thanks. So here I think what's interesting also is to see the importance of the close relationship between the senior management of the company and the board. So let's go back to this trying to get boards and the company do more, to accelerate progress. As we saw, we're not looking too good at this stage. And let me turn again to you, Julia. We see that basically the lowest level of engagement, which is already a step, is risk management. So how can the board help a company move from risk management to really contributing to societal progress? How can we operate that? How can the board help here?
Yeah, and I think I just want to build on what Michael and Raphael had said. I think what is important is at the moment what we're seeing is that the board becomes increasingly, not as much as we want it to be, but increasingly sophisticated or knowledgeable that there are things we need to manage when it comes to ESG. Yeah. May it be pressure, regulatory, investor, whatever it is. So this notion of oversight and how do I manage risks related to ESG there's an understanding for that. Yeah. I want to challenge a bit this notion that yes, I think board members should have a general understanding of what greenhouse gas emissions are, scope 1, 2, 3, but let's not go too far. I think the value of the board is not that they help us to do the ESG reporting or to measure.
So they don't need to be experts.
Exactly, right? They need to have an understanding. They need to be able to join this conversation. And I think this is also something where we need to be careful. In the past, what has happened quite often is that we outsource this to one board member. Yeah. And we say, okay, here's the sustainability expert. This person is now responsible for taking care for these issues. I think we need to have a common language and understanding of these issues. But you were mentioning it, Katel. I think the value of the board is now a step further, and that is to provide a strategic insight on these issues. Yeah. What are the opportunities that come now if we look at sustainability? There was this recent report from McKinsey that said, just looking at the net zero transition, it's around a $12 trillion US opportunity across different industries yearly as of 2030 if seized by the companies. So what is the role of my company in seizing these opportunities, right? Will I lead or will I follow will be a very important question. And this is, I think, where the board needs to come in. For that to be able to see these opportunities, there needs to be a common language and understanding. But it should not be lost in this, I'm going into ESG reporting, sustainability reporting. For that, I think board time is way too valuable. And maybe one last comment is setting the tone right. Setting the tone from the top is incredibly important, that we help to define a purpose, that we set the direction, and also that we provide the right framework conditions. If I still evaluate all my CEOs in the executive committee solely by the profit they make, then if I face a trade-off and dilemma, and you will face it when you transform towards sustainability, the decision will always be in favor of the economic bottom line. Yeah. So I need to adjust that. And we see companies now adjusting. But again, this tone and this understanding needs to come from the board level. And this is where I feel, let's not be lost in the risk management. Right. Important, but not the way to go.
Right. So what you're saying, basically, that's not a core conversation to be had maybe at board level. So I take 2 points here. The one on the role of the board to keep an eye on the long term and identify potential business opportunity in, let's say, going more sustainable, as well as also creating the incentives. You're saying, how do we evaluate our senior executives? Because they manage that. What are the incentives that we create? Some companies have put incentives in terms of sustainability deliverables. They have to show to actually get their promotion or their compensation. Right now, one follow-up question, however, is you talk about business opportunities. I mean, obviously, there is a lot of talk about, win-win. If we all go green, we're going to all make more money. So we've had a phase of that, but we came back from that, thinking, no, actually, reducing your carbon footprint, increasing the welfare of your employees and communities is costly, takes effort, and is hard stuff to do. So is that also a conversation for boards?
Absolutely, and I think also to manage expectations, right? I think you're saying we came over this conversation. I still hear this conversation quite a lot, right? Managers that are looking for the win-wins, and the business case for sustainability is still the question. And I always push back and say, soon there will be a sustainability case for business. You will simply lose your license to operate if you're not managing to change. And I think we need to be very much aware that this is what is happening. So I think there are win-wins, and there are obvious win-wins, and there is sometimes a business case for it as well. But the easy, low-hanging fruits, I think we have seized already. I think we're over that point. I think this is what you were saying when we came over that. We have seized the easy wins. We have already engaged in that. And now it's the more painful transformation, which doesn't mean that they don't pay off in the medium to long term. The challenge here is that you need to stick with it. And this is where, let's say, the digital transformation, in a comparison, there was just a quicker return on investment and lesser risk because you knew you would just increase your performance in all of this. With sustainability, there's a risk involved. There is some uncertainties. Which technology will really be the one? How is the regulator reacting in all of this? So there are investments, but it doesn't mean that they don't pay off. It's just less certain than with some other investments that we've been doing.
Yeah, and further in the future. So this role of boards to have the courage to bring this hard conversation, I think is important as well. Thanks for bringing it up. Isabelle, so sitting in all these boards across industries, can you give us, one concrete example of a company which has moved from risk management, and already we know it's a lot, from risk management to really generating impact, positive impact for people and for also the planet? Thank you.
Sure. So, well, I have many requests from board members, and one day I had a chairman who came to me and said, well, I had a question during the General Assembly. And it's a well-known bank, quoted. I won't say much more, but and he said, well, I didn't know how to answer a question about sustainability. What should I say? Well, there was no easy answer, but he agreed that we should go through a process, and some things were already in place, and they had to take really the subject and decide about where to go. They decided only about the E, not the S, and not the G.
Which is a trend, we see and we hear a lot.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. And climate under the E, by the way. Yeah.
But climate is an emergency, so I mean,
sure.
at least that's a step. And so we worked on that, and they've achieved a great success about this. It's really to take to be conscious about that, to be aware, then to take the decision, then to implement. It's really, and to take along the whole executive committee with it, so that they agree and they put in place. So that was an example.
Just let me pause here,
sure.
just to dig a little bit in here. So you were sitting in the board of that bank then. He came to you as a board member. So what was the role of the board specifically in helping with that process of change?
Deciding targets, mainly.
Okay, and did you have the expertise in that board? Did people know what they were talking about?
No.
Okay, so how, so can you tell me more about how this expertise came? Was this expertise from the outside, from their chief sustainability officer coming to talk to the board? How did that work?
A bit of everything, actually. It comes also from the press, because it's so much more visible.
Yeah,
Then it comes from one or two members that have an experience in another board room. Then from me saying, well, this is the agenda. You can not only have what I said, the normal agenda is the day-to-day problems. So only problems come to the board. It's not the good news, I tell you. So what do we need to deal with, and what is top priority? But I always try to say that along with this priority, it should be done with a sort of ESG bias to the way we solve this problem.
Right, so starting with the risk management is the way to go. I mean, it's easier to bring that conversation.
That's the agenda. It's more that it's imposed to us by the chairman, by the CEO, that they need this problem to be tackled, or at least a decision. That's where you decide, really. It's not only long-term trends about a strategy that is decided by the board, that no problem, but that's a long-term work, really, and with milestones that you check. It's also about control, finance and everything. But in the agenda, you need to keep some time to, the way you tackle the problem is really to bring up these ESG problems, sustainability problems, and the way you look at it should be sustainable.
Yeah, so in that particular case, you mentioned that there were other board members who also were educating and pushing. Do you find yourself sometimes a little bit alone pushing that agenda in the boardroom? I have to ask.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you don't have the will from the chairman, you can forget it. I mean, sorry to speak straight,
I think that's important.
I mean, that's, you can speak again. If he's not yet taking this as a key point about the agenda, it's only going to be talking.
So the importance of the chairman or chairwomen, using he, but maybe we can hope that we have more chairwomen also leading that agenda. If I may, we come back to that afterwards. You wanted to give us another illustration, not from a banking company, but from another industry, maybe.
Yeah, in healthcare.
Healthcare.
I also sit for psychiatric clinics. And there you have the top agenda. It is really mental health. So this is, already sustainable, I would say. But the way they look at it, so it's in terms of human management, is just so different from construction, ed tech, startups or banks. So it's very, very different. The inner sense or whatever is discussed is really mental health, even about the people working there. So it's very different. Mm-hmm. So when you speak about SDGs, they feel very away from that, although they are sort of part of it.
Yes, that's what they do.
Because of their first aim. But then they're in such an emergency that they can't really put in place anything more than that. But when they have a new project in construction, for instance, their first goal is really to have a sustainable building. So, okay. I mean, that's, it also depends on the industry and their own emergency they have to deal with.
Of course. So are you saying that for these basically companies already, let's say, doing good by the service they provide, either for the environment or for people, maybe it's harder for them to think that they need to do more at the board level in other areas? Am I hearing you properly?
That's, they think it's not them to solve that problem.
Exactly. So I think it's important because we go back here to the SDGs, we cover everything. I mean, basically a company, even if they do good on green, they cannot be treating their employee poorly or not taking care of the social aspect of it. It's really looking at that as a framework. So I think that's an important point. Let me turn to you, Michael. Do you have such illustrations of how companies have shifted? Do we have good examples and success story here where the board has helped do that?
Probably one example that comes to my mind, which I experienced myself. It's probably not the best case, but probably a realistic case. and it was kind of a board which kind of changed course because of a shock. So it's a machinery industry company, so very leading in their niche globally. And they used to do very good business in the past, supplying aviation and automotive industry with this very high precision machinery. And actually for a long time, climate change was not really discussed very actively in the board. It was really shunned to a certain extent. And then what happened to the company was that one of the main plants, the factories, was flooded and went out of business for 4 months, which huge distraction for the whole operations and supply chains and so on. And suddenly after this incident, after the emergency was cleared, suddenly the board was starting to discussing, let's probably look at climate change and what might be the impact of climate change, to our operations, supply chains. And then they first started really discussing kind of the risk issues and trying to, it really got on top of the agenda, the climate change on the risk radar. But then what happened, I think, was even more interestingly that they realized, I think now we have a real issue. We have to actually change our whole business model and actually not, look for other segments to serve. And actually within 1 or 2 years, the company managed to really shift the focus. And nowadays, this company, the fastest growing segment and the biggest segment now, it's actually serving wind farms and electric vehicle manufacturers. So I think it's really, this shock, really created a lot of action. So it really helped to accelerate. As I said, it's probably not the best example because it was an external shock. But shocks usually can help a lot to move ahead in this agenda. And
was it because it was an emergency and a shock that then at the board level there was space to actually discuss it?
I would say so, exactly.
Right. Okay.
Exactly.
And would you say that, we have shocks right? The past 3 or 4 years, we've had many shocks. So what about COVID? What about the Ukraine war now? Are these basic, can we turn that into, not opportunities, but a space to have that hard conversation at the board level, you would say?
Unfortunately not. What I observe is actually the opposite. Because of this imminent crisis and conflicts, boards really kind of get a very much more short sided perspective because they need to be solved and you postpone the big important discussions on climate and other big issues. So I really hope this will change soon again, but at the moment I really observe the other way around.
Okay, great. And what we also seeing, at least, well, it's not that widespread, but we've seen example recently of activist investors also shaking the conversation or trying to change the composition of the board. We've had the example of engine number 1 with ExxonMobil, where they managed to put 3 new board members as well. All this kind of shock, also something that we see more and more happening?
Yeah, I think it's a very good example. And I think it's another kind of shock, you know. An activist can also be a shock.
Well.
and I think the example you mentioned...
The result was a little shocking to many of us, but okay,
it depends whom you ask. Yeah. But I think that's a great example. Exactly. Engine on one, you know, with Exxon, you know, they had a stake of, I think, 0.02% of the shares. And actually, in the end, succeeded in removing, I think, four board members.
It was three.
Three board members, because they accused Exxon not having board members which were up to the job to manage the energy or the climate transition.
They didn't have expertise on energy at all.
Yeah. Exactly. And I think, in my view, this is a very good example, because that you also might need a little bit to demystify the notion of activist or sustainable activism. Good. Because, again, they also can be used for the good in the end. And you know, I think there are a couple of things which I think, even though board members and CEOs might hate activists, usually at first glance, but I think they have some positive impact they can have. First of all, they usually have a point. You know, they usually have identified an issue which needs to be solved. And then actually they need to have this point to convince others to follow them, because with just 0.02%, you can't make any changes. You have to convince many other investors that your point is useful. So you have to build coalitions, and then you can have change. So it's usually not a singular approach, but it's a coalition of people who think something needs to change. And then I think finally, I believe as well, activists can bring in this very important outside-in perspective, because they can compare, they have benchmarks, and they can they can complement probably the more inside-out perspective of a board. But I think, you know, in my view, as a board member, you don't need to wait for the next activist to be at your doorstep. I think what you can do is actually do a kind of a virtual activism. So just have a debate in the board and ask yourself, so if an activist were to approach us, what would he find? What would he criticize? What kind of weakness would he identify?
So to be preemptive.
Exactly, and then you can kind of, you know, use this to probably take a little bit more a proactive approach.
Yeah, thanks.
To address those issues.
You wanted to react to that point also, Julia.
To the previous point, where I was thinking when you were mentioning, did COVID or Ukraine war also provide some opportunities? I think in that sense, for supply chain resilience, maybe yes, because I think for the first time we're rethinking these very global, long, fragmented supply chains, where I have like 500 suppliers in my supply chain, towards rethinking more local, maybe shorter supply chains of higher value and quality, because we've seen that COVID, Ukraine war can really interrupt our operations quite fundamentally. And I think maybe in this sense, from an environmental perspective, there has been an opportunity to rethink how can we increase the resilience of our supply chain. And I feel that these were conversations. When I have the supply chain managers in our courses, we basically always hear now, they're in every single strategic meeting nowadays, they're invited, because supply chain suddenly became one of the major differentiators and strategic competitive advantage. So I think with this respect, maybe there was an opportunity to rethink, do we need to have these very, very long and fragmented and ship everything from A to B to Z to save some costs on the cost of the environment. Maybe there was an opportunity here.
But maybe there still is, that's why I wanted to bring it up. Maybe here, even though we look at all these accumulation of problems we have to deal with, like, oh, here they come now about sustainability. I mean, there is also a possibility of turning that into an opportunity to change the business model. And actually, yes, if supply chains are there now, that's also where 80% of the impact lays on carbon, I mean, for good or for bad. So maybe I think it's important to say that that might be an opportunity as well. I had to bring the activists because trying also to see how we can accelerate things at that level so that we're not all too comfortable. So sorry for throwing that onto you. So Raphael, how has the relationship with the board evolved for you? What's their role on moving away from just pure risk management to really looking at the impact of the company?
I think I can say our board, one major role they play is really in the acquisition of new brands for the group. Yeah. Now we have 8 brands in the group, and 4 of them joined the company maybe the last 3 or 4 years. So it's really accelerating, and they play a major role here. Good news also in terms of business opportunity is that all those brands, when they join the company for many reasons. But one of them is always sustainability, because they are looking for expertise from our company. So it clearly shows board members that it's a business opportunity also to be good in sustainability, or at least to have a strong expertise. Yeah. On the other hand, when we acquire new brands like that, it increases the impact. So for me, we have to update carbon footprint to embark them in the B Corp journey. So it's a lot of work to catch up. And when we have like a dynamic of acquire new brands like that, it's always a lot of work for operational behind. So the discussion we have now with them is how can we involve sustainability team during the acquisition process or during the selection process of new brand before acquisition, to do due diligence and to really deep dive into their sustainability journey and what we will bring them also before acquisition. So I would say it's a major role. And the second big role they play, they approve obviously big investment for the company. And for example, when we have big investment in the manufacturing site, so for example, for production of our own energy, circular water system, it's big investment, and they have to approve that. To approve that, they have to understand how it will have an impact, how it will help us to build and to reach our ambition in sustainability journey.
Yeah, so that's interesting because it's important to look at the relationship between the executive level and the board level going both ways, right? It's not just we take decisions and then it trickles down and you implement them. What you're saying basically is that someone in your role needs to be part of the decision-making process, right?
Yes,
for
exactly.
these big investment or these new brands acquisition. And do you see that relationship evolving also in your industry? I mean, beyond your company, when you talk to your peers who are also responsible of sustainability for a company, do you see them also being involved in the strategic board conversation more and more, or is it or not?
In the boardroom, you mean?
In the boardroom, yeah.
I think it really depends on the company. We are a mainly family business majority. And as you said before, the chairman has always been a sponsor, really involved in those topics, so I think it clearly helped. But I have many examples of companies where the conversation is not here at all.
At all. Well, so it's still a struggle, it seems.
Yes,
yes. Okay. So thanks. So let's talk to the ingredients of the board that we need to make that work. We just you just mentioned, Raphael, the fact that you were in a family business. So, Michael, is it easier for a board to be pushing the agenda on sustainability, if depending on the kind of ownership of that company, yes or no?
I think I wouldn't say it's easy or not. I think it's probably just a different way you get involved. Because I think the starting point in my view should always be the conversation between the owners and the board, to really align on what's your approach to sustainability, what's your philosophy, what you like to achieve. And in a family business, if you have just one owner or 4 family members, you can sit at the table and make a workshop and can get to some alignment, and you probably implicitly already know what they want. Now, if you are a publicly listed company, I think you still can get to this alignment. I think we have a very good case here, not far from here, Nestle. When 2 years ago, when they went to the shareholders and presented to them their climate roadmap, and said, look, that's our roadmap to 2050, what we want to do in climate transition. They put a price tag on it, it's more than 3 billion Swiss franc, and ask the shareholders, do you agree that you spend the 3 billion on this roadmap? And I think this one was, a very, and they said, yes, 92% approved that. Although it was not binding, but I think it was a very clear way of having a dialogue with the owners on getting alignment, how far do we want to take it, and what can it cost us? So therefore, I think, yes, it's also possible for public listed companies to get in this dialogue. Again, it starts with having dialogue with investors, with different stakeholders, to get a sense of what they want. But I think that's, for me, actually the most important, or the first step, always get this alignment between the owner and the board. And then secondly, what you just said before, I think, and also you mentioned before, I think the board can't develop any strategies or policies or whatever. They should not it's a waste of their time. And but the management needs to work, and they also know what's feasible, what's realistic, what makes sense, and also can ensure it's fully integrated in the strategy. Because I think the worst thing, in my view, what can happen if you end up with a sustainability strategy, which is kind of separated from your core strategy. This might look nice and people like it and so on, but it will fail eventually. I think you mentioned digitalization before, it was the same case there, if you make it siloed. And then I think thirdly, and I think back to your point about the competence of the board, I fully agree with you. I think they don't need to get in the nitty-gritty, but I think they have to have, as I said before, this basic understanding. probably, sharing perspectives with other board members, other companies, to see how they do it and how they get this kind of competence.
But that seems to be a very important point. I was looking at some research done at INSEAD from our governance research center that they did with BCG, and what 80 or 90% of board members think that, and they have a pretty large sample, think that sustainability is key for their job. I mean, a very small portion of them feel that they are equipped to carry that function for the firm. I think the results was, I forgot what it was, like less than a third of board members interviewed today think that they are equipped to carry that mandate. I think that's an important number, right? So there is the question of competency, there is a question of ownership. Let me ask you about the actual composition of the board, Isabelle. I know that's an agenda that is dear to you. Who should we have in a board to make it work for sustainability?
Well, as I said before, the will. If you want it, you will get it. But it's true that if you have a referee, I think, okay, sustainability is probably so much personal, about values, about what you really feel and think is good, which is not easy, at least, to have a global conversation within the board. So that's perhaps a first challenge. But someone who's already convinced with good communication skills and willing also to help someone within the company on the operational level, that would be a relay that would put in place and discuss and propose some measures, perhaps as Raphael is doing in her company. But really challenging. It's not just there's not only one way to do it. It should be open-minded, open for discussion. And then I will get back to the point about family-owned businesses.
Yes.
I guess it's again the governance of the organization of the board. There are some family-owned business that run really as you wouldn't notice that the family is prominent, but in some others there's no discussion. It's very different from one to the other. And it's not only family; it can also be historical ownership or historical dinosaurs.
So it's not a given.
People that were always there, or so, and not open to change, not open to discussion, not open. But I also see it's only climate emergency; it's also social emergency by millennials. They are so much pushing into big change and thinking differently. So I mean. For me, it's really someone in the operational, quite high level, and then a challenger within the board. It can be a specialist or not a specialist.
But someone who's going to challenge the status quo. So if I'm a chairperson of a board today, one of the recommendations would be that I try to bring this different perspective, some millennials. I mean, again, I'm going back to family business and the succession and etc., right? Bringing the younger generation in the boardroom to express these views. Would be something you would recommend?
Yeah, I think so. Although I would rather have committees with younger people.
Okay.
Because it's not the same. I would say you need to bring experience into a board. I mean, I'm not fighting for the 50s plus, but it's more that you need to bring really experience and not react on the first news. And I would say it's. You need to analyze the situation, really take enough, perhaps step back before you decide. So it's perhaps a wise way to go forward. And also it takes much time, really. So being in a board, sitting in a board, it is not just, once in a while, a nice evening meal. It's more long meetings, long hours, prepare your dossier. And really analyze all what you can have, try to get some other kind of information from outside, remaining confidentiality, that's for sure, but really to bring different competencies each time. Yeah. So it's diversity.
So you mentioned also the role of a dedicated committee. What do you all think about having a dedicated sustainability committee? I mean, we know that board functions with specific type of committee on particular issues. What's your view on creating a sustainability committee at the board level to push that agenda?
I'm really for.
Yeah, I'm in favor of that.
Yeah, it works. We created that 1 year ago. So a sustainability committee, so on same structure, same functioning than remuneration committee, audit committee. Compensation committee, and now we have a sustainability committee. So in this sustainability committee, we have 3 board members, internal experts, and also some external experts. From other companies, from NGOs, from sustainable finance.
So that's where you bring these different voices that Isabelle was talking about. Okay.
And then what it brings right now is that those 3 board members, they really upskilled very fast because we took a lot of time together. They did a training. So now they are real sponsor in the boardroom, and also they can speak with their peers. It's not only us coming to the board meeting and saying we have to do sustainability.
They are your champions.
But yeah, they are the champions and really discussing with their peers on that. So for me, it can really bring something. Let's see how
and that worked for you.
Yeah.
Julia, you have a view on that?
I think this is a fantastic example of how it can work, and I can also see the danger, right? And the danger here that I see is that we're outsourcing this.
C'est ça,
right? And so I think how you're organizing it, it's fantastic. But the danger that I see, also with diversity is incredibly important. Don't get me wrong, but there are two open questions here. One is, are these members? Do they really have a voice, right? Just because I hire someone, are they included in the overall board composition and have a voice? And is this topic outsourced?
Yep.
And this is pretty much the same discussion that we have on a management level. Yep. Should we have a chief sustainability officer, and are we outsourcing responsibility? Or how are we trying to get it actually cross-versal? And I think we cannot, diversity, again, I want to highlight it, is super important. So is inclusion, and so is that everyone actually understands this topic and understands their responsibility. A committee can be an extra added value, but it doesn't forgo the need to equip all the other board members on these topics.
Well, and I think that's what we heard from André. We're now at the phase when we need integration.
Indeed,
and of course, if it's only a sideshow in a committee, it could defeat the purpose, but what you're saying is that it also be a step if you keep that focus towards integration.
I totally agree with this risk. I think it's depending on the mandate you give them.
C'est ça. Ouais.
Right now, the mandate they have is to upskill the other and to bring the conversation and not to take decision for the others.
Yeah.
So
okay. Sorry, I got sidetracked. Yeah, so Julia, back to you then. So are there other elements, ingredients that we need? So we heard about who sits in the board, the importance of the chairperson, the ownership. Are there other elements that can help, ingredients that can help this push?
Okay, I mean, one obvious one that I need to talk about, because it's...
I think your mic...
Is it me?
Yeah, you're good.
No. So one obvious one would be being an academic education obviously plays a role. Okay, so we can't forgo the need that we have a common understanding of some of the basic concepts.
Yes.
Again, we don't need expertise, but we need to be able to join the conversation. We mentioned it, I think, several times. When we talk about ESG or sustainability, in both ways, we tend to put a lot of emphasis on environment and here on climate. I'm not saying climate, there is a climate emergency, absolutely, but there are other many pressing issues. If we look at the planetary boundaries, for instance, we know that biodiversity loss is a massive issue, largely influenced and driven by companies, right? So what are some of these water issues? What are, there are other issues, right? So we need this educational level where we understand that. And then I think the other important point that I'm currently really advocating for is this mindset shift, where we basically really move away from saying, sustainability is a risk, and I want to push that as far away as I can.
To the risk committee. Yeah.
How can it also be a sort of opportunity and something that is what I feel is exciting, right? I want to be part of the sustainable transformation. And maybe, again, the parallel to the digital transformation, which I feel is interesting. Board members were not engineers. They were not experts in digital, right? This was, we could have had the same panel on the digital transformation as well. But they understood the strategic value of it. So how can we bring that into the conversation, the strategic value, moving away from simply, oh my God, this is coming, I don't want to have anything to do with that, towards changing this narrative and say, guys, let's not miss out on this massive opportunity that we also have. And I'm not talking about win-win, but I'm talking about there are opportunities and, again, license to operate.
And the need to rethink your business model. And with the digital transformation, we have huge example, I mean, that are taught in our schools on cases where some company embraced it and changed their business model, and others did not. Think Kodak, who did not, and completely lost their relevance, right? That's what we're talking about here.
And Kodak is such a good example that I often use, because because Kodak really showed you can continue going for a while without seeing that the crisis is cooking, right? So it really is this, until you realize it is too late. So they could continue on a very good traction, and this is what is happening at the moment. Many say, but we're continuing to doing good business, right?
And it's okay.
There's no need to change. And this is where I think we currently still have a window of opportunity, but this window of opportunity is closing quickly
down.
Because
So
some companies are now leading the way.
yeah, so hence again, I mean, the importance of the board to think about how is my company going to become relevant in 10, 20 years from now. Raphael, for you, it's, I mean, you are also, I know, in the process of certification, for instance, with B Corp, not for instance, I'm sure there are others that you've done, but for that, I wanted to ask you not about that process, but about the role that certification can play in accelerating this conversation from the operational level to the strategic level of the board. I mean, can that help as well to engage in that process?
On that, I would actually take the example of the B Corp journey specifically, because I think, yes, certification can help, but this one specifically really helps me for two reasons. So, okay, benefit of a certification, it's really attractive, we know it, they know it, etc. But it's really talking about scores, for example, in the assessment, performance with B Corp score. It's a way that it's something they understand. So, for example, for us, we have 9 assessments to do, so we can compare score with different regions and different brands.
You can benchmark
within the group. So we can show them clearly the difference of performance between the entity of the group and where they are good at, and on the same framework. So I think it's something they can clearly understand. It's easy to understand for them. So for me, it really helped. Yeah.
Right, and that brings also us to a point we discussed when we were preparing about the importance of indicators, which also speaks to board members, right? And the BIA that's provided as part of the B Corp certification helps kind of give these indicators to you that you can use and you are not making up. So any other points on indicators quickly, because, or no? Okay. No, okay.
But I think it's again that they understand. So how far do you go to explain it? I really struggle on how deep I should go to explain things to the board member. But I think if you have the opportunity to speak during each board meeting, then you can test many different ways to speak with them. So I think the first step is really to have sustainability invited during board meetings, and then they can test different ways to speak. Sometimes very deep, sometimes not deep, sometimes just some few indicators. So
let me turn to all of you here to see, I don't see you really, but if you have questions, that's your chance to ask them. Otherwise I can continue. Sir, we have one person here and you here. Ladies first, if that's okay with you, sir. No? Yeah, let's do that. We're talking, thank you.
Thank you. Great panel. Julia mentioned earlier the trend of boards bringing on people with the ESG sustainability label.
Yeah.
That's a good first step. I mean, obviously, boards need to go much further and really integrate. But what recommendations would you have for those people that are brought on as the token person? What can they do to really implement change on the board?
Thank you. Excellent question, so that they don't feel too alone and the one pushing that agenda. That's on you. I mean, it's not just on you. Everybody can respond.
No. So as I said, it's very much the chairperson who can do a lot about the composition of the board. And I think that diversity within the board composition is key, because it brings really different and new ideas, and you can accept that you have difficulties accepting that someone will change his mind or her mind, but if it comes from someone else, then it's widely accepted, and the way the argumentation, all the mindset and thinking is well accepted. So I would say diversity, and again, to have a word in a board meeting is well, if I would say you have the competencies, then you're heard.
Yeah, but I think the question is also like, you're the only one bringing it up. I mean, we've all been in that position, I think, in our jobs. I mean, me, in SEADIS 1, for instance, when I try to push that agenda, it's like, oh, here she comes again. And you feel also that you always have to contribute on that topic. So that can feel quite lonely, no? Yeah.
I think it's also, a two-way street, I think, to learn the language of the others. And and kind of see how they think, how they build, how they frame topics. I think that's one very high level recommendation. I think the other one as well, not make you become just the sustainability person, but volunteer to be as well member of the audit committee or strategy committee.
Great.
Just make sure you are seen as a journalist with a very strong competence in ESG.
That's great. That's a great point. So maybe today, if you're invited in a board, maybe you can put that as a condition in terms of, okay, but I want to make sure in the discussion with the chairperson that my role doesn't only limit to that role. Okay. Any other views on that? Because I think it's important.
Yeah, and for me, even if there is some risk and it's not enough, you still need someone that is always saying, hey, what about sustainability? So it's the same in organization with operational. For example, we have a team, a sustainability team, but I don't want to make it grow with 100 people, but I want to have person in each department, in each teams, that have this little casket of sustainability.
That's right.
And even if it's not enough, I will know that this person in every meeting, every speaking opportunity, he will bring sustainability topic on the table.
Yeah, so the internal, the activist intrapreneur. Huh? So that's a good point, and there could be the same role in the board, right? You might not raise it at the meeting, but you go behind and say, hey. Anyway, Julia, you wanted to say something?
I want to double down on what Michael has said. I think the importance of connecting to their worldview is incredibly important. We oftentimes come and we push them with scientific data, whatever it is. Translating that in a way that resonates with what they understand, a language that they speak, what is important to them, is important to be heard. And I think this is one important. And the other one is really this notion of when you're alone somewhere, you always need to build alliances. This doesn't happen in the actual meeting. This happens with a coffee, with a dinner, with whatever it is. Building alliance, I mean, not on a board level, I have always done that. When I was alone on this, start building alliances, understand what are the topics that they are passionate about, and connect your topics to these, right? So this is really, oftentimes it's a framing exercise, because many of the topics they're passionate about relate in one way or the other to sustainability. Connecting to their worldview, going away from this is me pushing this towards how can we push this topic together, because I think it's also in your interest, is something that I feel is incredibly important.
And that goes back to your points that you were mentioning earlier about the coalitions that these activists managed to create, even though they were a minority in the investors group. So we go back to the power of coalition here.
Perhaps,
Sir,
no, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Just
Go
to add
ahead.
up, it's true that you need to say it again. But one of the first things that I tell them is that it's an ongoing process. It's starting now, but it's never going to end. It's going to be forever. You just implement that. You need to think like that, and it's going to be pushed until it's really implemented everywhere. So
count your small steps. Sir, you've been very patient. Thank you very much. Your turn.
Well, thank you all, and thank you, Julia, in particular, because I think you finally clarified for me what ESG means.
Right.
It's the risk-based approach. And I must say, I've been here for 4 days trying to figure out the difference between
I'm so
ESG,
glad you came.
sustainability, and impact, and what people are calling ESG 2.0. I think that there's even a talk on ESG 4.0.
No, we're talking about a different mindset, as she says.
So thank you for that. You've taken a stand, if you like, and as many things in life, when it's a muddle, sometimes it helps to split things out. So my proposal is, I wonder at the board level if we should talk about someone who's responsible for the governance of environmental and social risks to the company, which is a risk perspective and a risk mindset, versus someone who is responsible for the social and environmental impact on society and nature. Yep. Which is an opportunities mindset. These are quite different things and quite different types of people.
Yeah, and yet related. Do you want to answer to that, Julia?
Fantastic proposal, because in many ways, this is also how it's done on a managerial level. If you think about where do people that work with ESG sit, they report to the CFO most of the time. So companies have understood that to some extent. So ESG sits there. The CSO either reports to strategy or innovation or even the CEO, right? So I think on this level we see it, and I think it's a fantastic idea to separate that as well. They're very much interrelated though, right? So it's not that one can go without the other, but it's a very important point to say maybe one just wears the head of saying, we have some risks that we need to manage, and someone else wears the head and saying, where do we want to go? What are the opportunities that we're seeing?
And
it's a very different
mindset, but I think the interrelation is interesting. And many companies are also putting the risk management, the ESG part, under the audit committee.
Exactly.
They're tasking the audit committee to look at that. So it's basically embedded in the structure because risk management is what the company does, right? So we also see that as an illustration in many companies, right?
A lot, but the real importance is what you mentioned here is that we're careful with how we call this. And what I'm seeing is that many just now put ESG everywhere because it's such a mainstreamed word right now and it resonates with so many. Even like colleagues in the sustainability world that would just equate ESG and sustainability in whatever they do. And I feel this creates more confusion than it helps. So I think it's a very important separation. Both have an incredible value, but let's be clear of what we're talking about.
Right. And ESG 3.0 is just considering even more risks. Huh? So, yeah, you're not sure. But anyway, so yeah, let's be clear. That's why we wanted to clarify all this jargon first. You have a question, sir, quickly. And then here, and then, yes, and then we're going to wrap up. Here and there. Do you want to come, please? Yeah. Here, yeah. Thank you. Quick question, and I'm going to try to be quicker in the answers.
Yeah, quick question. What about considering the members of the boards as humans?
Yes.
Because, you know, they are members of the board, of boards, but they are also humans.
Yes,
so
part of nature.
I mean, the session is being fantastic because you are telling the truth about what really happens. So, for instance, that you may need a shock, as you described, for people. This needs a mental click, an opening of minds. Opening of minds doesn't happen, or is more difficult for that to happen if people are in their roles.
Okay.
We heard here about fiduciary duty and how it prevents asset managers from going towards sustainability, while at the same time recognizing that there are existential risks.
Right. And so your question is?
What about convening members of the board in untypical settings?
Yes. So how about they show up as humans? Thank you very much. Good questions. Well, yeah.
Perhaps it gets back to the previous remark. It is also that as some of the boards were not used to deal with ESG, with sustainability, the first way to have them to look into that problem is the risk, is to say, do you know how much the company could lose on that ground, on this and on this element? And that's probably the first reaction. So to get them react, I think it's to show them the risk before they can really think about the opportunity, because they're supposed to have set a business model that was mainly on the key element of the company. So I guess the way it's been done so far was towards the risk.
Thanks.
We have a bit of an unfortunate situation where in our economy we have started to separate our true human selves from our roles that we're occupying, right? So I think what you're suggesting here is just, it's coming, but we're not there yet. Because if you think about some of the scandals that were happening, big industry scandals, Volkswagen diesel scandal, for instance, they're all fathers or mothers or whatever. So they have learned to separate, to some extent, their values and who they really are with the role that they're occupying. Reconciling that is absolutely important in the economy that we want to achieve. And I think we're making steps in that direction. I like the idea, right? And it's also about what I have seen works well is to experience this. In many ways, sustainability is still something abstract. How can we make this that people feel it? In Indonesia, what they did is they took the policymakers and they had a conference and they didn't know what is happening. And they took them in this room and they were all complaining it's so hot and it's humid. And they really, I mean, how are they treated here? And then they said, what we wanted to show you here is how if you're not acting, Indonesia will warm up in 5 to 10 years, right? This is how our climate will change in just 5 to 10 years. We can put AC as much as we want. This will be the new reality. So they felt it. Yep. And I think connecting that to the human being behind the board member is a very important step.
Very good. And the experiential learning has been very successful in board making decisions on disability, for instance. Final question. It's super short and interesting.
And quick, I wanted to thank the panel for making this clear distinction between ESG, so risk approach, and sustainability, and SDG, so like opportunity. Wanted to thank also the previous question and build up on that, having these two people on the board that are seeing different things. And don't you think that there is part of the confusion comes from the fact that the word sustainability is sometimes used for ESG and also for SDGs.
Yeah.
So an Exxon, it's going to say we are sustainable because we have high ESG scores, and Tesla are going to say we are sustainable. And yeah, is this a problem? Should we reserve sustainability to one of the cases and the other say resilience or something?
Yeah. So yes, it is a problem. I think it's fair to say that most of the greenwashing problem comes also from that part and how people are playing on words, so we should all be clear on words. I want to just close here to give Jonathan a chance to come and give us some practical closing remarks. In thanking you, I wanted to ask each one of you to give one tip to people here and to all ourselves on how, as a board member or as a senior executive, you can accelerate sustainability from the top. Just one concrete one. If you are to leave us with one, what would that be? Let me start with you.
Thank you. Have the courage to bring diversity. Governance will come along.
Thank you very much. Julia, let me take you in order. Julia.
For me, it's really this mindset shift. See sustainability also as an opportunity and responsibility, not just as a risk. So it's really about finding those strategic opportunities and responsibilities.
Thank you very much, Raphael.
Always have sustainability in the board meeting topic. Having a sustainability committee with a mandate to upskill the others. And maybe, sorry, it's a three tips, but to have like a kind of make them meet other companies, other business model. So
thank you, Raphael.
Probably have a shared understanding among the owners, the board, and the management about the 4 M's, about the mission, metrics, measures, and measurements.
Raphael, Michael, Isabelle, and Julia, thank you very much for sharing your insight in a candid manner. Let's give them a big round of applause because I think they deserve it. Thank you very much. And as we all exit the stage, someone else is coming in, and let me hand over to him. He's the other co-host of this event, Jonathan Norman. He's the CEO and the founder of BLab Switzerland. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And let me also say a big thank you to all of you. It was a fantastic panel, brilliant people, brilliant mind, and I can hear a lot of ambitions. Wanted to make some closing remarks, and after what I heard this morning and going back to this role of board member to voice the 2 silent chair in the boardroom, you know, the nature and future generation. So how we can create this accountability, how we can also create the moment to avoid fear to become a driver in the boardroom. We listen that training is definitely a key driver on bringing more than the conversation, the knowledge to address those challenges. And then to really create those resilient strategies around, I would say, you know, surviving plan for the economy, the society. This is not a short-term game. This is a long-term value approach. And to not feel alone down the road, we created this Swiss Board for Agenda 2030 Alliance. And in this alliance, there is, you know, safe space for exchange. We have also partnership with academics like IMD to train the board. So we will run a series of masterclass in the upcoming weeks and months for those alliance members that are invited to, aside of just being trained, also as a requirement to design their SDG stakeholder-driven strategy, to also adapt and enhance their fiduciary duty to take care of all stakeholders and the planet. So it's not just an alliance and a good gang of folks that's sharing good ideas and practices. This is also a set of requirements to really push forward and advance those commitments and supporting the SDG economy or the stakeholder capitalism. You know, I heard in one of the questions today here that we get a bit lost in translation. Obviously, taxonomy will help on that. But we should also be careful of not getting lost in transition. And so asking the board, what is a just transition, is the right question to ask, because to answer that question, They need to increase their knowledge. They need to deal with the fear or deal with what is, for me, the major cause of, I would say, inadapted strategy is mastering the status quo. And so if you want to fight really those topics and advance the agenda, we need to definitely nudge and spur on that clearly. So yeah, I just want to, knowing that I need to be brief, to mention that back to echo what Emmanuel Faber said 2 days ago around, yes, ISSB new norms will bring, those requirements for sustainability training at the boardroom, or they will also need to allocate the right time. Let's think about the agenda. So we have now an agenda, Agenda 2030, the 17 SDG goals, that help people to connect with a realistic time frame. When I was talking in 2015, 16 about Agenda 2030, people say, 15 years, I will stay in the board. Those I will remain in the boardroom. Now, 7 years ahead, we have this opportunity, and to not feel alone again, I guess there is this opportunity to join such different coalitions and alliance, and the Swiss Board for Agenda 2030 is one that could help some of the Swiss companies to not just lead the beat or to advance those conversations, but also to tackle one major, I would say, moment and activity, which is going to a further step to collective action. So who we can peer, cross-sectorial, with other companies, even with competitors, to advance those topics, to make the nature and future generation hear loud and clear in the design of the society needs. So thank you very much. Thank you again, Kate, for the moderation. It was fantastic. Thank you, InTent, for the partnership. Thank you, all the panelists, Isabelle, Michael, Julia, Raphael. It was an amazing moment. And then just to let you know that this was a milestone in our journey with the Swiss, Swiss Board Agenda 2020 Alliance. We will meet again in Davos during the WEF week on the 17th of January 2023. And so I look forward to welcome more Alliance members and to engage in those conversations and action. Thank you very much. Have a good day.